All right, welcome back. Religious revivalism isn't an entirely new thing in the American story. The United States has gone through a few different religious movements, and aside from the First Great Awakening, which happens in the 1700s, an example of another might be the Second Great Awakening, which happens in the early 1800s. Remember, this is a time in the early Republican period of populations growing, of mobility, happening, of national infrastructure beginning to be constructed. It's a time when Americans are on the move. So the Second Great Awakening then kind of builds on the heels of the first. And the other four things that we're going to kind of talk about with it are what are called camp meetings, right? Evangelicalism, the Shakers and the Mormons, abolitionism, as well as temperance. So again, this is a time of great religious activism and thought, which individuals felt inspired either in their relationship with faith to create churches, to plant churches, to sort of extend churches, to create new faiths, or to use how they looked at their faith to try to impact the world around them. So the Second Great Awakening, it varies. So you have those who feel inspired by it in the East, those who feel inspired by it in the West. In the West, primarily camp meetings would be an example where a lot of this kind of activism took place. Places like Cane Ridge in Kentucky, where you had real sort of emotional sort of appeals to individuals to recognize what they would have looked at as their sinful nature, that one needed to go out and perform good works in order to avoid what they called backsliding. And broadly, the term, as well, to kind of connect with all of this, is a term called evangelicalism. Now, evangelicalism has become, within American Christianity, a rather politicized term in the late 20th and early 21st century. But generally, it just sort of means sharing your faith or spreading your faith. Now, those who are sharing or spreading that faith obviously would have a positive view of it, though the late 20th and early 21st century definitions of this have become altered, a bit skewed, that kind of thing. Now, the number of churches, the number of different kinds of faiths that grow in America in the early 1800s varies. So the two biggest church communities are the Christian communities. It's the Methodists and the Baptists. These, number of these churches grows exponentially by the 1840s and 50s. Now, there are other faiths that grow at this time, not perhaps as recognized. So certainly the Shaker community, my mother Ann Lee, is starting to spread in the early 1800s and is creating their separate communities. Another example might be the Church of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church, that's going to grow in the 1820s and 30s and 40s, and will probably be driven to Utah, partly by real violence and unrest against them in places like Illinois in the 1830s and 40s. Now, those who tended to support churches, who tended to support Second Great Awakening churches, who tended to believe that one needed to go out and perform good works, who needed to impact the world around them, they did so in a wide variety of ways. So there are any number of different kinds of social activist groups and organizations and individuals throughout the 1840s and 50s that are really going to affect the United States. So one example would certainly be abolitionists. You have the series of abolitionist societies in the United States in the first half of the 19th century prior to the Civil War. There are those who wish to see slavery ended by legal means. There are those who wish to see slavery ended violently. There are those who within the structure of their organizations are going to provide aid to those who are helping slaves to escape already. So abolitionism itself is a varied entity. Another example of one of these organizations or one of these movements that someone might support, if you were apt to be part of the Second Great Awakening, would be temperance. Temperance in the 1820s and 30s and 40s was an active organization, but it was class-based, certainly, and partly gendered, because of the kinds of alcohol that is being consumed, sort of at this time, right? So average consumption rates, average drinking rates for Americans at this time were pretty high. And so, the idea of tempering or tapering one's drinking, much of this would be related to the working classes and urban areas and these questions of new immigrants. All right, thank you very much.